Hello, welcome to Unsheathed 109. Today we will be commenting upon episode 009, which was published September 16th, 2009. Today we have K.M. Hirosaki, Kyell Gold, and myself, Kit Silver, but we also have a guest, Jakabe. Gentlemen, welcome to our true secret mountain bunker.
Yes, indeed.
We're excited to be here in the fresh mountain air. It's not really a bunker, technically, because we're outdoors.
It's an outdoor bunker, whatever that's called.
Not a bunker.
Our secret outdoor mountain patio.
Like an outdoor bank vault.
Yeah. The open air compound.
Anyway, hi.
Hi.
I'm Kyell of Gold, first of his name.
Yeah, and I am a BMOC K.M. Hirosaki. I'm just big muscle head on campus.
And I'm Jakabe, just Jakabe.
Perfect.
Nailed it.
Before we get started with the questions, we're reviving another Unsheathed tradition, which is to surprise K.M. Hirosaki live on air.
Yay! It's my favorite.
We have a gift.
Oh gosh.
I will allow him to open.
This is legitimately my first time seeing this. I have no idea what this is going to be. Oh. Now I'm even more intrigued based on the packaging.
Man, what great
It
packaging.
says infoxicated. And it's got a very...
And there's a picture of a fox on it.
This is like the opposite of how episode 009 started, where I'm just a persnickety, angry little thing. And, oh gosh, this is so pretty. Yay. It is for wine, for those of you keeping score at home. This is actually gorgeous. Ooh, it's nice and heavy. It's laden, as it might you might call it, pendulous in your palm. Thank you so much. This is actually very
Now I'm viewing that through a whole different lens.
What an interesting choice of words.
Yeah.
that's technically what I'm here for. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. This will get use out of me for sure.
It was a new Fox Dad pun that we had not seen before.
Yeah, it was like wine moms get all their wine puns, but most of the fox puns we see are things that are like, for fox's sake.
Yeah, which I already have that on a shirt. I don't need that.
That could be your whole brand, though.
My-
Just for Fox sake.
My favorite was one of my friends gave me 4 sake glasses with 4 fox sake.
Okay, see, that's clever.
It was amusing. Anyway, hooray.
Yeah.
So it's been a little while since we did our podcast. We got caught up with some house projects and then some conventions. So I don't think the last time we've done this has been since about 2 months ago, since we met and did
Something like that.
We had a destination wedding in there to go to.
Yes.
Yeah,
That was quite the
not any of
destination.
ours.
No.
But yeah, it has been.
So it's good to see you all again.
Yeah.
But the benefit is that now the first question we had discussed on this episode number 9, which was from November the Wolf, is now in November the month also.
Yeah.
We planned it.
So synchronicity
Do you
works in our
November?
favor.
21st of December. No, I lost it.
And I wanted to introduce Jakabe. He's been on the podcast before. I don't remember specifically which episodes, so I'm sure
Usually
we'll get
really
there.
asking terrible questions at conventions.
We have you to look forward to at Rainforest, perhaps, next episode.
Oh, probably.
Remember Rainforest.
We talk about Rainforest a lot. Like, even in this episode, we were very excited about Rainforest.
It was a thing to get excited about back in the
Yeah.
day.
It was like a proper writer con. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
As
Felt really nice.
As so many things have gone in this world, things to get excited about turned into things to look back on with some regret.
Oh. Oh, wait. Yeah.
I forgot what timeline we're in.
I know,
Aw.
right? Oh.
Yeah.
But thank you for joining.
Glad
you were
to be
not
here.
on the previous episode, 009, but we wanted to take this opportunity. So we'll have a couple questions for you, just to give folks a history of your background again. You've
Sure.
worked with Soulful. Actually, yeah, tell us a little bit about your writing influences with the fandom.
I've been in a writers group with K.M. and Kyell for a little bit. And that's been really, really fun. And I've learned a lot. I've applied none of what I've learned to my own writing.
More than a decade at this point.
Yeah. I like to think of myself as like the Paula Abdul judge in the writers group. Like just kind of nice and loopy a little bit. But I have done some slush pile editing. I've done some kind of like weird bits of copy editing here and there, and generally helped with like anthologies and stuff like that. So getting involved with Fur Planet Productions as part of their convention, I guess, sales team. You'll see me at random conventions there. But yeah, it's been fun. I've just been doing a little bit of everything. So like, writing, editing.
You're not the sales Martin. You're just you're a sales rabbit.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool. So usually the format is we'll kind of do a catch up, talk about some topics that pop up, answer a couple questions. But then after the two questions, I'd love to ask you some questions about, the experience of reading slush piles and what you look for in regards to that editing, that very first editing pass.
Oh, sure.
We definitely get a lot of people at the SoFolf Academy and in the podcast asking, like, what do I do? Where do I send my stories? How do I send my stories? What should I do now that I've written this thing? So I think people would like to hear your perspective.
Excellent. I'll be glad to give it.
Awesome. We also, from episode 009, we are able to answer the question is who made a hotter fox voice? Was it, who are the two people?
Bruce Willis or George
Bruce
Clooney.
Willis or George Clooney?
And it was, of course, George Clooney.
Yeah.
Which I think was our conclusion anyway.
15 years ago, me tried to make a case for Bruce Willis, but today me is like, clearly it's George Clooney. I don't know what I was thinking.
I could see Bruce Willis, like peak Bruce Willis as a fox. Yeah.
Do you remember the one character he did voice in 2006 that was almost fox-like?
Bruno the Kid.
Was he the baby in Look Who's Talking?
He was.
He was.
Yeah.
He was RJ, the raccoon.
Oh, that's right.
Over the head.
Oh,
Man,
right.
Yeah.
I saw that movie so many times.
Oh, man. I
That
saw it in
was-
theaters. I know that much.
Yeah, I saw it in theaters like maybe 6 times. Like,
Wow. Okay.
yeah. I really loved the squirrel and the bear for reasons.
For bear related.
For bear related reasons.
I was going to say, I only saw Cloud Atlas in theaters 3 times, but I guess runtime wise, that probably equates to 6 viewings of Over the Hedge.
Yeah. It's about the same, yeah.
I only saw it once, and my memory is kind of hazy, but I remember the squirrel scene as my favorite.
Yeah.
The bullet time, the one that they later ripped off for Quicksilver in the X-Men.
Oh my God. Wow. They totally did.
Don't bait and trap Jakabe with comic talk.
Yeah, that's the rest of the podcast now. Let's talk about the X-Men.
All right. So back on man, we could definitely do an X-Men podcast. But yeah, for us, Midwest Fur Fest is like in less than a week. So I don't know if I will get this podcast edited and up before then, but if I do, come see us. Kyell will be at the Fur Planet table most of the time, but we do have some panels as well, so check out the writing panels. We do have there are a lot of writing panels. I'm actually a bit stressed. I haven't done as much work as I think I should do, but MFF does seem to try to do a pretty good job with like putting lots of different kind of writing panels out there. So
That's
I
true.
am glad to see that it's
Yeah.
still happening with MFF.
I've done tons of preparation work for my writing panels, as I always do.
You've done a lifetime of work. So
Yes. Kate got mad at me once when I was I think it was when I was GOH at Rocky Mountain, and we were talking about the panels, and they asked if I was ready for the panels, and I said, yeah, I don't really prepare beforehand for panels. And Kit slapped me on the shoulder and was like, He's been preparing.
I think for a long time while on the convention and panel circuit, my prep work was show up drunk and see where things go.
See what happens.
I have actually started doing more panel prep as we go into the post-pandemic years, because I came back to do a panel and I was doing it by myself and realized, oh, I have like 15 minutes of material to talk about. And once I'm through that, it's just questions and me, and I didn't have anyone to bounce things off of. Like when I do a panel with Rukas, I don't have to have a sheet prepared to read from, because we need like 3 topics and then we'll talk for 45 minutes. But when it was just me, I needed to have all of my thoughts organized down on paper so I could say, right, I want to talk about this and then this and then this and then this. And then I ended up writing a whole big thing for my novel panel that made me realize I know way too much about writing a novel to just fit into one panel. Maybe I should write a book about that.
And is that what your trigger was? That's what I'm.
Yeah, it was because I was writing all that stuff down about. I had an entire panel just on things you should do before you start writing a novel.
No,
that was an hour of talking, and I could have talked more about it. And then I thought I should write this down, and then I did. And
you mean like playing video games, like having a beer?
Yeah. There's a whole chapter
Girls.
on procrastination. I'm gonna write someday.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, exactly. Awesome. So yeah, MFF's coming up, and I'm gonna do a little promo rat. You have a new book coming out at MFF called Dead Right.
Yeah.
Super excited about that one. Had a chance to reread it because we've been working with a different artist for the cover. And it kind of, I appreciated the lens of kind of as an action movie, as a comedic. I kind of was reading it as a comedic action movie, kind of like a buddy cop movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
And reading it with that lens, it hit all the beats, and I was like, oh, perfect. So
Thank you.
It was good.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. The cover looks great, and we liked the cover artist so much, we're getting them to redo the first book's cover also, which we're in the process of negotiating right now, which is also exciting. And I'm excited for everyone to see this one. It feels weirdly late because I've also already finished a draft of the 3rd book in this series, and so I'm like, wait, what do you mean people haven't read the 2nd book yet? But in 2 weeks, that will no longer be true.
Also, I really like that we're in 2024 and people are paying real artists to do real art for real books.
Great.
It's a fight.
Yeah, for sure.
That's our separate AI episode. That's going to be our old man.
We could go on
Shouting
forever.
at clouds.
Rat. But anyway, K.M, what have you been up to?
Let's see. My weekly translation stream is still going strong. We just started our new season not too long ago, which we are still powering our way. I am powering my way through the translation. Me and Zap are both hosting and doing the actual show itself. But yeah, we are going through 1998 Sega Saturn visual novel Machi, Crossroads of Fate, which is a lot of fun. There's a lot of really great bits of storytelling in there. And I will touch upon this later on when we get to, there's another question that I think this will dovetail nicely into. So I will hold that in my back pocket.
I think if you're up for it, let's dovetail because I think that's a great segue. Into
Okay, yeah. So one of the things that during downtime that Kit asked me, and this is going to lead into my other thing about how I do far more prep for this version of the podcast than I ever did back in the day when we were like recording it off the cuff, I suppose. But as somebody who does lots of work in other language, in this case Japanese, how does that impact writing? And one of the things that I had to say about this, and this is something I say a lot when it comes to the notion of translation in general, is that very few things teach you quite how your own language works and all like the sort of special quirks about your own language, quite like learning another language.
That's true.
And yeah, exactly. And like once you're forced to actually analyze what you're actually saying in your own language in order to get that across, it really does help build a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a sensibility towards knowing why you need to choose the words you're choosing and what you're getting across.
Is metacognition the right word for it? Like
Maybe.
you're thinking about words, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking a sense of the structure of language in general rather than just your specific language.
Right, that's true.
You did a week or two ago introduce to me the concept of someone being confused about prepositions.
Oh yeah.
which I thought was very strange. But then when you explained it out, I realized, oh yeah, it was, what was it? Being intolerant of or intolerant for?
Yeah, like I have an intolerance for this and an intolerance of that.
And I was trying to work out what the connotations of each one were,
And there
like
is
what
a
my
subtle
expectation would be. And I think
difference.
that, But then you also pointed out that the word preposition is dumb and
It
meaningless.
is dumb. Preposition just means, oh yeah, this is a word you put in front of another word, and it's like, why? For what purpose? And we don't teach that in grammar school in this country, and so that's one of those things. And like, this is somebody who was a native English speaker, and it's like, do we just not need these? I'm like, well, no, we need them. They're definitely an important part of grammar and syntax, and you can't just stick a default filler in there.
Right.
How else would you know where the squirrel is in relation to the tree?
Yeah. Is it?
That was how my friend remembered prepositions. The squirrel can be on the tree, under the tree, over the tree, in the tree, around the tree, behind the tree, etc.
Within the tree.
Within the tree.
That's a really good like visual. Yeah, within the tree. Oh man, I would read that story.
I think growing up, what I found is for my education it was more of a root memorization. You remember that this combination of words means something different, and they just tell you, oh, it's because of prepositions. But I do think that's changing a little bit, where they're maybe trying to teach it more about the structure.
Yeah, like diagramming sentences is a thing that I don't think gets taught anymore, which is good because it's just confusing. It's like, do you want to make a sentence in your own language like even harder to understand?
Yeah,
diagram a sentence.
Hated those.
So
I think it's a useful tool in some cases, especially when you're trying to figure out what does this phrase modify or what is it supposed to modify. But the way that it's taught is generally not helpful, and it's taught too early, I think.
Yeah, far too early.
Oh really? So
Like
when did you
second
learn
grade
how
or
to?
something. Yeah,
Oh
it's
really?
Yeah, I got
really
it.
odd.
I got it in middle school for sure.
Yeah, same.
So so I never actually learned how to diagram sentences in English. Like I learned all about like syntax and that kind of thing. That was just a trick that I never learned until I grew up. So then like I was like, yeah, I understand how sentences work, and then I tried to learn how to diagram sentences, and it was like had this existential crisis. So like I've been speaking wrong this whole time.
Yeah, it's confusing. It reminds me kind of a little bit of using a slide rule, where it's a really useful thing that a lot of people used to know how to do, and nowadays people get by without it.
Yeah.
We have calculators that can diagram sentences, I guess. Maybe not.
I mean, that's kind of a translator. Like the translators are basically doing that.
Well, we do have Microsoft Word's assistants and
Yeah.
things that will tell you how to correct your sentence. And
So if I'm understanding what you're saying is like, because you had to learn Japanese and their frameworking system of diagramming sentences is not, it's like even a different concept. Even diagramming a sentence is so different. It allowed you to appreciate that it is a structure on top of concepts in English when you do your writing and translating it to words. Or
Yeah, and then so one of the things that's actually weirdly similar between writing unique original prose and translating something is that you, in both cases, you have a very specific idea that you need to convey in words, and now your goal is, what is the best way to phrase this? A lot of people, and you see this online a lot, especially among people who are not arguing in good faith, where it's like, just just translate it word for word. Stop trying to editorialize it. And it's like, it's not editorializing. It's just languages don't translate word for word. If they did, they'd just be ciphers of one another. And like there would, like for example, Japanese sentences have a tendency to trail off without finishing. That's just a thing that when people are speaking Japanese, you just kind of let the back half of the sentence drop off because it's understood. But that's the middle, like the end of a Japanese sentence is the middle of an English sentence. And so, oh, cool, I have the beginning of this, I have what will be the beginning and end of a sentence, but the core middle thought isn't there. And so it's like, okay, at that point, do you take the assumed part that's missing and just verbatim put that into English so you know what that was going to be? Like a Japanese person reading this would understand what goes in this missing space.
Right.
But that's not how English conversation happens. And so that's now like an active choice on how you want to decide to phrase something. And this is another one that is like a personal bugaboo of mine, is in Japanese, you refer to members of your own family by, titles and like forms of address. So like, your older brother is like Oni-san or maybe Oni-chan, depending on how you're doing it. And I see it get translated into English as big bro all the time. And I'm like, nobody goes around referring to their brother as big bro. And,
Right.
if they did, you'd look at them like they were mad. Like, you can just, and it's just like, you can just have them call this person by their name and that fixes the problem. But what if the name is not included? Because to a Japanese person, this person just referring to them as brother makes sense. You don't necessarily need to know their name. You just need to know the relationship between them. And so now it's like, I don't know what this character's name is, so I can't put it in there. And that's something that you have to work with.
So if you were faced with that problem, like what would you do? Would you just say like big bro, or would you have like a nickname?
Big bro. Like sometimes you can get away with brother.
Okay.
Like in certain cases, but I also don't like that all the time either.
Right.
And this is one of those
tough.
things where it's so dependent on the actual context of what you're doing that there's no flat answer that
Right.
I would be willing to give on this is how you should translate this thing. And also, just because I would pick something and translate it a certain way doesn't mean another talented translator might not pick something completely different.
Man, back when I was, I guess, really up my own ass about like Buddhism, I would read like multiple translations of like, various sutras and stuff like that, because I do think you're right. Like the choices that the translator makes kind of highlights a different aspect of the original language. And when you start doing that kind of comparative work with translation, you get a fuller sense of what like the root word is supposed to convey.
Yeah.
The thing that I sent you that was going around about the woman who just translated the Iliad putting up the first verse of the Iliad as translated by the four most prominent people before her, or the three prominent people before her, and then like the classically accepted one or two classically accepted ones, and then Fagel's translation, which I read, and then her translation. And she talks about what each one of them is striving for, what each one of them is keeping from the original, and what each one of them is discarding. But there's choices in each case. There are some that say, I'm going for the fidelity of the words over the meter of the prose. There are some that say, I want to preserve the meter of the prose, and I'll make some concessions in the words. There are some that say, I want it to be understandable to a modern audience, and so I'm translating and tweaking here and there so that 2024 people will be able to understand this.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting. It was kind of exactly what you're talking about there, but in a very side-by-side, well-presented piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really neat.
There was one book that I was translating, and each chapter began with a quote from something. And so these quotes are all in Japanese at this point. So I have to figure out, okay, what was this original quote, then go find it, and then figure out is there an accepted translation for this in English? One of them was, it was a couple of lines from Dante's Inferno, and so I wound up consulting like 3 or 4 different translations. I'm like, which translation of Dante do I want at the chapter head of this? Like, what conveys the image, right? And like that's one of those things where I had to like actually give it some thought. And
But that's a really fun part of the job, I think.
yeah, and then like there was a thing where there was one of the quotes was from Macbeth, where it's like, "What things bad begun, oft something by ill." I forget the exact line. Don't fire me for forgetting my Shakespeare. But that's one of those things where, okay, I'm not translating the Japanese translation of Shakespeare. I'm just going and grabbing that in.
So how so I that's awesome. How does that influence your writing of English?
In one really weird like sense, I start thinking, if somebody were to be translating my work, how would I want to make sure it was clear enough that people knew what I was doing? There was a great bit where one of my editors on something I was translating caught this, where a character has acquired like military intelligence, and they're looking at it and they're like, oh, like send this along to so and so. She should know what this is. And the editor's like, do you mean she should know what this is as it would behoove her to know what this is? Or she should know what this is as she ought to know and can therefore explain it to us?
Interesting.
Right? And it's one of those things where that's ambiguous in English, and it didn't occur to me until another English speaker was like, which of these two does that mean? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's B. Right? And it's like, and it's like, you're right, like that can mean two things. And being careful not to do that so that you're not confusing people, that makes it helps you keep a mindset of really making sure that you're honing in on being nice and clarified and concise, and
like specificity of language is a thing.
Specificity of language.
But
I think for me also,
if I could real quick, because right, direct response. But knowing that and actually using that on purpose, and then having different characters in your book respond to it in the different ways.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's the way. Understanding it at that level is the way you then use it to fuck up things in your story.
Right. Exactly. Now, once it's one of those things where when you know all the fiddly rules behind something, now you get to have fun by messing with them.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
Yeah, and I was going to say, for me, it opens up different ways of expression, both in character dialogue, but also in narrative, because narrative voice is different throughout my different books. All of the books that I write, I have kind of a default voice, which is mine, but also there's different shades to it, and there are different ways that you can say the same thing in different voices, and understanding how other languages arrange their words and use words and have idioms to mean things gives me at least a framework for trying to expand the ways that I think about and express things in English in my writing. So it's interesting. I've been thinking about voice because I'm at that chapter in the writing book, and so I was thinking about it a lot recently, and how sometimes the narrative voice is really kind of the voice of the main character, just as a narration, and not even when it's a first person book. Obviously it is, but sometimes when it's a tight third, it's also kind of that character looking back on the story. But sometimes it's a different narrative voice. The narrative voice of Collations is a much more like history professor narrative voice than any of the characters, but the narrative voice in Price of Thorns is pretty obviously Nivi's voice looking back on the story. And they all express themselves differently, and so the more I learned languages, and the more I learned about languages, the more possibilities opened up for ways of expressing the same thought.
I'm really curious about this. So, like, did you make a conscious choice to frame your narrative or narrator inclinations to be like history professor? Was that like the most obvious choice for the kind of story you were telling, or did you play around with that a little bit?
It was a conscious choice to make it a more distanced narrator and not as related to the characters, because it felt like it's an alternate history, and so it felt like a historical retelling or a historical event, whereas Price of Thorns is all about stories, and so it makes a lot more sense in a meta sense, for Nivi to be kind of telling this as the story of his adventure.
Yeah.
Even if that's not explicitly what is happening in the book.
In the game that I was talking about playing on stream earlier, there are these interjections that pop into the story, sort of like footnotes, and they're in that sort of dry academic voice and tone, which is separate from how the rest of the game is written. But it'll also be super funny while maintaining this like mechanical dryness, which is a type of humor that really resonates with me. So
Yeah.
I find that very easy to render into proper English in a way where it carries the same sort of hit that you would get as a Japanese person reading this. And then every so often you'll get one of these footnotes where the voice is clearly meant to be that of the person writing the footnote and not the footnote itself. Where like it'll like talk about like it'll if it's like reminiscing about things from the past, and it'll be like, okay, so true story.
All right.
Very nice.
Awesome. So thank you. That was I think really a fascinating aspect of writing. But let us jump into the two questions we had from 009.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you want to read the November one?
Sure. November writes, Dear Kyell and Hirosaki, you two are doing a fantastic job to the fandom by running an all-writing podcast. Aw.
Woo!
Yay, it's 15 years later and we came back. I hope this influences fans and writers alike to recognize the importance of literature within the fandom. I have a rather long question. That's not that long, actually. In the third episode, Hirosaki said that you guys almost never specifically call out the fact that you're talking about anthropomorphic characters in your stories, because this fact is implied within the fandom. In the process of anthropomorphizing, a lot of animalistic attributes, like senses of smell and hearing, have been lost or greatly detracted. Certain aspects of this fantasy, such as foxes being universal tail raiders, have overwritten the characterization.
Razors. You said raiders.
Did I?
Yes.
Yeah. Me knew. I meant to say razors. They have overwritten characterizations from myth and fables, such as foxes being smart and cutting thieves. They could be smart cutting and thieving tail raisers too, though. While authors like yourselves have developed complex characters as well as maintaining the classical roles of various species, most short publications do not. As mass consumption increases, does writing within the fandom face the loss of these roles, which are an integral part in establishing the foundations of anthropomorphism? And then he goes on to talk about not meeting me at a con 15 years ago. So we could...
Yeah, so the gist of this question seems to be, are we going to lose the centuries-old cultural stereotypes associated with animals from the time of Aesop and before, as the fandom writes about their own characterizations of different species?
And I would say that in the 15 years since he asked this, I don't think that we've overridden anything to that big of an extent.
I don't think so. I do think that there's maybe less of that characterization in furry work that I've read recently. There isn't so much about any of the cultural stereotypes that went with animals. They're just characters. And sometimes it's more that the fact of having different species is used as a lever in the story. One novel I read recently focused on predator and prey divisions, but there's not so much about, historically foxes are clever and wolves are rapacious and bears are slow and so on.
Cheetahs like to be peed on.
I don't know. That trait seems to get passed around from like species to species over the years.
I think there's still a little confusion exactly what his question was.
I think part of my confusion was that he said as mass consumption increases, and I wasn't sure if he was referring to
Within the
fandom or
Or out, yeah. I think it just broadens. I think people are educated enough to understand that you can have all of the above.
Yeah.
And it doesn't dilute any one thing. It's just now a thing you can play with. I don't
think we're in any danger of the next Zootopia having like foxes being cock hungry sluts.
Can you?
Now it's an episode of us. One thing that he mentions here and this is, we had a preliminary discussion about this, and I didn't touch on this. He talks about senses of smell and hearing in like species, don't get brought up in furry writing. I think that's not true at this point. I think that
No, I agree.
I think that that's definitely like a thing that people very specifically incorporate.
I think to a degree, but like, I don't know. Maybe I'm not reading the same kinds of like furry literature you are, but like it's never like this rabbit picks up something that like a wolf could never, right? Like through hearing or.
Well, that's
like,
just racist.
Yeah. So like it's just racist assuming
I
that
don't
like
know.
wolves can hear too. They have ears.
Little pointy ears.
Yeah, I know.
think
Tiny
maybe
baby
it's
ears.
smell in particular being so intrinsically woven in with the sexual experience.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Like,
There's definitely a lot of how furry senses would change a situation.
Yeah.
I see that come up a lot, and I like playing with it myself. The whole idea of, I guess, cheating on a partner being much harder to hide if the partner can smell the other person.
What you have Wolverine all over you.
yeah.
Like
I tripped.
they actually like
Into
they actually
Wolverine pit.
they actually did that in the movie Palm Springs.
That's right.
Yes, that was part of that one.
It was which I really enjoyed because I was like, oh,
People smell.
he
Yeah.
smelled it. And yeah, just because like we focus on it with our anthropomorphic characters doesn't mean that human people are incapable of smell by any means. But I thought that was cool. But I do agree. I think like playing with the different senses is one of the joys of playing around with anthropomorphic characters.
Why give your characters these big, soft, triangle-shaped ears if they're not going to hear things?
I think it's like, I mean, in some ways, and this
Other
is really
reasons.
reductive, but it's basically giving your characters like reasonable superpowers.
Yeah.
In a reasonably superpowered world.
And I do try to balance that because foxes and wolves, canids, for example, have better senses of smell,
But there's a drawback.
generally better hearing, but worse distance vision. They can't see. And so in collations, I didn't want Kip to just be super powered where he could hear things and smell things that other people couldn't. So there would be times when they would say, "Do you see that thing on the horizon?" And he's just like, "No."
You gave them handicaps for things that, interesting.
Now I'm imagining you have like cat characters. Like if you try to point with your fingers, they can't grasp. Like they'll just look at your finger.
Yes, it's a finger. What?
Is that so? Like their super sense of smell is actually debilitating in certain scenarios. So the world has Nutrascent.
Yes.
I mean,
I mean,
that's a detail that has really interesting social ramifications, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, are they?
it was something that I wanted to put in because I thought about what it would be like if your sense of smell was so heightened that you were getting all of this information all the time, and whether people would want a respite from it. And that was how I figured out to do that. Or also in the case of you want to spray down the bed after your mistress has been there so that your partner can't smell them.
They smell Nutricent. So.
Right. Well, then you can tell. And then there's high end places where they're like, it's Nutricent, but accented with flowers or something. So it's not just because Nutricent has a weird, that antiseptic hospital smell to it, or like an ozone tingle.
Yeah. I imagine wait, why did you Nutricent the room has like the same thing as like, wait, why did you delete your web history before
Yeah.
computer?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
God.
Yep.
Your sniff history.
Yeah, your
Sniff history. Facebook in my world is called Scent Book.
Yeah, it is.
It was called Scent Post at first, and then people reacted poorly to that, so I changed it.
Oh my God.
Do I smell hot or not?
Ooh.
Oh,
So I don't know if we've answered November's question, but I think our opinion is like, no, anthropomorphization is fine.
And KM brought up the very good point that this was a pre-Zootopia question.
Yes.
And Zootopia has reinforced a lot of those stereotypes and brought them back into the current discourse.
Their teaser trailer was all about explaining what anthropomorphic animals were to the audience, and
Right.
anyone doesn't remember those.
Yeah, I do
Yeah.
remember those.
And then definitely Finnick in Wild Robot is a great fox.
Yes.
he is a great fox.
Very,
Fink.
Fink, sorry, Fink, yeah. Fink.
He has the immortal line, "I'm a fox, I do foxy things."
All right. How about the last question?
The last question was from
We don't know.
an
We have a special guest.
an unnamed fan who was a fan of mine, who I think must have just sent me this question, but I do apologize. It's been 15 years and I don't remember who that is. So I'm not holding out on you guys. Anyway, they write, "You're one of several writers I've read who advises against plotting a story too heavily, as this deprives the characters of the chance to express themselves naturally. So you start a story without any idea how it's going to end, then you write, run into a few surprises along the way, and somehow everything magically resolves at the finish. Then there are other writers I've read, some of them aspiring ones, who place their emphasis on structure, preferring to plot everything out in advance before setting the story on paper. So they start out with an idea, then they plot, and they breeze through the writing phase because every detail, every fear, every sudden twist and turn has been planned out in advance. So there's very little to worry about in the writing or editing. And surprisingly enough, they come out with decent results. So is your advice then geared toward the more experienced writers? Does freedom in writing of the characters necessarily detract from the overall structure of the piece, read scattered all over the place? If so, would it be inadvisable for a less experienced writer to approach his writing with this mindset? Is there a point where you consider it safe for a developing writer to abandon the crutch of plot, or is it one of those techniques which must be adopted as early as possible? Or have I instead horribly, tragically misinterpreted something in either perspective that this whole series of questions has suddenly been rendered invalid and nonsensical
Over the last 15 years.
over the last 15 years?
and I love that this is. I don't know. Like, do you guys listen to Writing Excuses? I'm not sure if we're allowed to mention other podcasts on here, or, but like they constantly have this like debate about like plotters versus pantsers, and like where on the spectrum, like
What's the debate?
basically just which is generally better, because like it's widely understood that writers have tendencies towards one or the other, and they've determined that like it's actually the spectrum, right? Like so, and it feels like a really personal thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I think it's honestly up to you.
I
Like
was
whatever
gonna say,
process works for you.
I'm gonna give the answer I always give to this kind of question is whatever method works for you is the best one. Like if you're getting results by going with one thing over another, and like it doesn't matter how much somebody else swears by it working for them, like they're not you. They don't have your brain.
But I think the thing is, people who ask this question are the people who aren't getting results, so they're not sure if what they're doing is right.
Right. And I think the corollary to that is that try everything.
Yeah.
Not to go back to Zootopia too many times in this podcast, but if you're hesitating because you're thinking, I want to write this book, but I don't know if I should outline it first or if I should just dive in and write it, pick one. And if it doesn't work, do the other one. There is no weight to a first draft that nobody but you is going to see. There is no
I like that.
pressure
Yeah.
on anyone, including yourself, to get it right the first time. And a lot of people don't get it right the first time. I scrapped 20,000 words of a novel draft because I took it to a writing retreat and someone said, this feels like it would be better in first person. Why isn't it in first person? And I said, because ... And then I said, why isn't it in first person? And now it is. But I had to rewrite all of that because it wasn't working the way it was written the first time.
Yeah, that was me with Summerhill, where it's like, if it's not working out, why don't you just like edit it until it's better? And I'm like, because it's not, the building is the wrong shape, and no amount of changing up the rooms is going to solve the problems I have with the shape of the building.
Yeah,
Like, I just need to go back and do it again.
Well, Thousand Leaves also, you started with a completely different protagonist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did. Yeah, I did, and I pulled out characters. There's entire subplots that got excised because it's like I'm already covering this information elsewhere. I don't need to retread it just to make sure that the reader isn't. It's like they'll get it.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Do you find as you go through different genres, I'm not sure how much genre hopping you do, like that the demands of the story kind of pitch you in like one direction or the other? Like,
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, there are certain types of. I find that if the story itself is very brisk and emotional and things are just kind of popping off, then my pace of the story will be much faster as opposed to slower and more considered. Like that's something that I feel that the form of the words that you're writing and the sort of the structure of the story you're telling reinforces the mood and emotions of what type of story you're telling.
The fantasy stories I've written, so I should also say, I do not remember telling people not to plot out their stories in advance. I think what I might have said is don't adhere too rigidly to a plot you've plotted out in advance, because that's what deprives your characters of the chance to grow and affect the plot as you write the story. So my current method is maybe 75% plotter for most books, and I'll talk about the recent exception in a second. But I actually want to get all the beats of the story down in my head and write them down before I start. I want to know where it ends so that I know where I'm headed to. And I liken it to a roadmap where you say, I want to start from here and I'm going to end up in Denver. And I think I'm going to take this route. But then you might get halfway there and read about a beer festival that's happening in Grand Forks, that's in Michigan, Grand Junction, and then say, okay, well, we want to go to the beer festival though, so let's detour down through Utah and then we'll cut over that way and we'll come in that way instead of going the northern route through Cheyenne. So, but the end result is always the same. And so I want to know where the story's going, and then as I build up the characters, as I'm writing the story, I'm kind of herding them towards this ending, but they're determining the path that they take to get there. And the genre question is interesting because the book that I just finished last week, a draft of, is a mystery, which I style after the Agatha Christie mysteries.
Right.
And I did not plot that one out in advance on paper because mysteries in that vein have a fairly rigid formula that they follow. So the plot was already there in my head. It's introduced, you meet all the characters, there's a murder, there is confusion about who might have committed the murder, there is finding out more information around the people and the characters and the time and what was going on, which illuminates some things and confuses others. Sorry, the Pee Wee Herman thing from his basement is coming into my head. Your mind plays tricks on you. You play tricks back. And then there's a second murder, and then there's a solution. So all of that was already established. If I want to write a story in this genre, it follows these things, and you can play around with it. And Agatha Christie did play around with that formula because over the course of the 80, 100 books that she wrote. But the reason I didn't plot it out ahead of time was because it was already there. I already knew it. And so I discovered a lot of things along the way about the characters and which character was actually going to do one thing or another. But the mile markers were pretty rigidly fixed.
Yeah. That reminds me of a future episode with our teacher and friend, Dick Power.
Yeah.
Because when we did film study, it crystallized that for me, where it was basically like, hey, each type of film genre has beats that you have to hit. So that's the framework, that's the plot. And then the way you get between the beats, that's up to you.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah. Doctor Who did a great job of this where they have an Agatha Christie episode, but because Doctor Who is a time traveler, it's actual Agatha Christie, like in an Agatha Christie mystery, and it works really well because you're hitting the beats.
Oh my God.
And yeah, it's designed to fill in like when she went into like that fugue state, quote unquote.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
A movie that I showed you guys a year ago, See How They Run.
Yes, that was really good.
Is also an Agatha Christie mystery that involves Agatha Christie herself.
Yes, it does. Oh my God, I'd forgotten about that too. How droll.
It's an excellent movie. If any of you out there like Agatha Christie mysteries, I think it's on Max, but it has what's his name, Sam Rockwell and Saoirse Ronan, and just a fantastic cast of characters, and it is a delightful movie all the way through.
And to sort of rewind a step and a half, we were talking about structuring stories and knowing where they're going. I had one story that my whole crux behind it was that the big, like, emotional core was there was this big bonfire dance. It was about traveling people who, before moving on to a new location, they would burn all the things they weren't going to take with them.
Right.
And then, and so it was this whole thing, and it was like, this is where I need the story to get to. And by the time I was done writing the story, I'm like, this is not where the emotional crux of the story happens. And so the scene with the big bonfire dance is not actually in the final version. Like, I wrote it, but it just got in the way of the story.
That's funny.
That's so interesting. Wow.
I have multiple times come to the end of a book and either said, oh, this isn't the end, I need to write more, or been 3 scenes from what I thought was the end and thought, oh no, this is over now. It's just you want to I like to do whatever you want to do, as we said, do whatever works for you, but I like to have my map ahead of time, but then give my characters and myself the freedom to do what's best for the story as I'm going through it.
Well, that's great. I think that's a good question to end on.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up the podcast, I did want to Jakabe, talk real quick about your experience. One of the questions we do get is kind of like, how do I, now that I've written this thing, what do I do?
Yeah, yeah.
And, we really haven't dug too much into editing passes yet, but we will. That'll come up. But assume they've done an editing pass and they've got it past that thing. Is like, how should they find out who they send it to, and then what should they send? Generally.
Great questions, all. I have no idea. No. So the Furry Writers Guild has become actually a really good resource for aggregation, right? So like all the furry publishers that are in the game are kind of like accepting submissions, or for whatever reason, they keep a pretty updated list. You can follow that to whatever publisher site and see about their call for submissions.
We're down to like 3 publishers now in the fandom, I think.
Yeah,
something like that.
they're.
It blossomed mightily for a while and then contracted again.
Yeah, and I think it's just because, I don't know if you guys have talked about like furry publishing and the state of furry publishing, but it's
really.
one of those things that is a full-time job that you have to find some way to fit between
Jobs that pay you money.
Yeah, jobs that pay you money, right? And so like, I think in this economy, it's just so difficult to have that kind of lifestyle that allows you to do that. That like, I think that's why a lot of furry publishers are contracting as much as they are.
And
I think a lot of them got bought up because
By Amazon.
Fenris,
Uh-huh.
because economies of scale mean which Fur Planet has a huge catalog, and so they can have a bunch of people. They have large tables at conventions with a huge variety of product. But if you're a small press that's just started out in the past few years and you have 10 titles in your catalog, it's not going to be worth the time for you to go to conventions and pay for a dealer's table, pay for hotel, pay for transportation to sell
Maybe
5 to 10 copies of each of your 10 books. Like,
Also, we're at a point now historically where the youngest, most socially active parts of fandom are the first children who have come through school almost completely digitally and like a digital upbringing, and they don't read books as much as the previous generations did. They just don't.
Yeah.
So do you think there'll be the opportunity for so it's really hard to get into the big cons, which is kind of for the point you're arguing, but also there are a lot of new cons popping up. So is it potential for there to be a new, the Good Size of Rainforest in the future, where a con decides to be, hey, I'm going to focus on writing, and then they become the writing con, and then if you are a small publisher, you can go there knowing that you have an audience who's dedicated for that. Are we that stage yet, do you think?
I think we could be.
I don't know that if a once-a-year con is going to be enough to make an entire business model viable where it wasn't before, though.
I think the way to make a small press viable would be for them to be digital only, to be honest. You have to minimize overhead as much as possible. Right. If all you're doing
it's
is
that way already. The problem there, the channel you're missing is still the in-person audience.
Right.
So,
and you could go to conventions and do panels and talk about your books and pass out postcards advertising your books and stuff. But to have a table and sell physical books, I think a publisher at this point needs to be a certain size or have a certain size catalog in order for that to be worthwhile for them. I do think it's possible for you to have a small press that you just sell the physical books, and maybe you go to that one con once a year, and that's your advertising con. But I should say this from the perspective of, if I were starting a small press and I had 5 to 10 titles, what I would do is I would approach Fur Planet and ask if they would sell my books at their table for the big cons, and then I would pick a small con to go to on my own and sell my books there, but I would advertise online and have more of a presence and engagement to get people interested in the books there.
You wouldn't go to a convention where the other people were already selling and then try to undercut them? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. But I do have a question for Jakabe related to slush pile reading and editing,
Okay, cool.
which is, do you have a slush pile story that has stuck in your head from your time reading slush piles?
Yes.
And was it one you passed on or one you accepted?
One that we ultimately passed on, I think. And it's really interesting to me because, I mean, there have been some like pretty disastrous slush pile submissions before, and some pretty like shining example ones. But this one, like, fairly middle of the road. But for some reason, it was just one of those story ideas that needed like a couple more editing passes. Like, I read the whole thing, I thought about it, like, and that's actually rare for slush pile reading. I mean, I don't want to say that. Like, you read everything, but like, you know, giving it multiple passes and kind of like really absorbing it and like that kind of thing. It was just like kind of one of those like persecution stories. Like,
There's a word I haven't heard.
yeah. But like, we still get a lot of those, right? Like, it's still a thing. So, but it was kind of like taking place in the antebellum South. So like, furries were all like black people, and it was just like you needed a sensitivity reader for this. I can't in good conscience. Like, the story clearly had things to say. It was really interesting, but the fundamental premise was just like so flawed.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, we can't in good conscience publish this, right? Like, you can't just, yeah. But I still think about it, right? So it's interesting because that happens a lot more than I would have thought when getting into slush pile reading, is that something is a really good story, or, you know, I didn't waste my time with the story, but, you know, we can't publish it for like some reason that like is a big barrier. So those are the ones that tend to stick with me. The ones that, like, you know, I would want to see this published somewhere, but not here.
Not here,
Right.
and not in this form.
Yeah,
I mean, I
exactly.
think that's a really good, important part. Is a slush pile reader, you are representing an organization that has a certain audience and certain values that they're trying to promote. So it's like,
Yeah.
that influence, I have to imagine that influences the decision process, right?
Yeah, like every publication, every anthology has its kind of like house style, right?
Yeah,
that you're
house
trying to adhere to. And for like an anthology, for example, you're having themes and you're expecting variations on the theme, right? So, you know, you don't want to pack an anthology with the same variation on the same theme, right? So like, you're also going like, well, this is a really good inversion of the Big Bad Wolf story, but we have like 8 of those already. So like, now it's like, which one is the best? So if you're like kind of pitching to a theme, what I would recommend as a slush pile reader is this is a good chance to bring out like your deep cuts, right? Because like, everyone's going to be going for like the Big Bad Wolf story, but if you have like I don't know, something that's a little out of fashion, and, you know, I want to bring back the tortoise and the hare or something like
It's
that.
like
right?
how like the Prestige fell flat for me because I'd already seen the illusion.
So, right, yeah,
And I'm
exactly.
like, yeah, that was
Yeah.
just a better version of the same movie, basically.
This is I call the third cab rule from Sherlock Holmes, is about ideas. Holmes tells Watson at one point, get to the train station, don't take the first cab that comes up, don't take the second, but take the third, because the first cab is your enemies trying to get you, and the second cab is because they know you won't take the first cab, so you take the third one. But I think of that in terms of ideas. Like, don't take the first idea that you have because that's the one that everyone's going to have. Don't take the second idea because that's the one where all the people who reject the first idea are going to go to. The third idea is where you start digging into the stuff that comes more from your unique perspective than from the big cultural zeitgeist that we all share.
Right, exactly. And I think a lot of those stories, especially ones that make it into the anthologies, are the ones that, like, I think a lot of people remember, right? And can be a really good way to break in, I guess, like, to the genre. If you come with like a pretty, just a nice, tight little story that like no one's like thought about, right? You build your brand that way, right? So I think for anthologies and that kind of thing, really know kind of what you're up against, right? Like if you have a killer idea for like a big bad wolf story or something like that, then like that's a statement, right? Like you're putting a big chip down. Like
Done the work. Do the
yeah,
work.
yeah.
I think it can also be not just choose your own, not just try to avoid the common idea, but make the story yours.
Right.
And that can
Right.
mean
Understand the
use a
common
common idea, but express it in a way that is meaningful to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that will resonate more than just, I think this is what everyone wants to read.
Right. Exactly.
Well, all right.
All right. No, that's a great.
I feel like that's a good conversation to wrap stuff up with. This was a lot of fun.
Let's go fill up your infoxicated glass.
Yeah, it's time.
It's sitting there all empty and sad.
Well, we'll fix that.
Signing out. This is Kit Silver.
Do we have any? We did all our plugs already, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I think so.
I'm K.M. Hirosaki. I'm also a plug.
Read more books and put more things in plugs.
But I'm otters.
Amen to that.
And I'm Kyell Gold.
Oh, I'm Jakabe. Bye.
Good night, everyone.